32 years old, I was running events in the south of France for a friend's birthday. At the bar, a man I'd never met started talking to me, and he was the brother of the person who had booked me to organise the event. We talked for a while, and at some point it was mentioned that I'd been feeling restless, that I wasn't sure what the next chapter was. And he looked at me and he said, "Come to Mexico, it was amazing." And that was it, that was the whole pitch. Within 3 months, I closed my businesses, sold everything that I'd owned except for my comic book collection and my guitar, which I left with my parents, and bought a one-way ticket with no return date and no plan beyond getting there. What I want to talk about today isn't the dramatic version of that story, it's the insight underneath it, because every founder I've ever worked with has made some version of the Mexico decision. The moment they chose the uncertain thing over the comfortable and the known. And what that decision teaches you, what it demands of you, and what it gives back is something I think is worth unpacking properly. Welcome to the Lead Well channel, where we explore the inner world of leadership, well-being, and what it means to build a business and a life that doesn't break you. My name's Trevor, and I run a multi-award-winning restaurant and cocktail bar, but I didn't come from a hospitality background. I built the business from the ground on up, learning as I went, figuring it out in real time. And the reason I didn't come from a hospitality background is that I chose uncertainty over comfort at 32 in a bar in France. And this video is about what happened next, and more importantly, what it taught me about the nature of choice itself. Because I think most founders underestimate what they did when they decided to build the thing that they built. They look back at it as a practical decision, a calculation, a plan. What it usually was, if you're being honest about it, is a version of buying a one-way ticket. And the lessons that come from living inside that kind of decision are the ones that nobody teaches you in any business book. To understand why the Mexico decision made sense, you need to understand what was underneath it. By my early 30s, I was running multiple things simultaneously in Bournemouth. I had an events company, a record label with 2 acts on it, a non-profit that educated musicians on how to develop in the industry, part-time lecturing at the local college, the Dorset Music Awards. Within that world, I was considered a leading authority on what I did. And I wasn't particularly happy. Not unhappy in a crisis sense, just quietly, persistently, inexplicably not settled. There was something underneath all of that I couldn't name and I couldn't shake. A restlessness that sat beneath the functioning and the producing and the building. A sense that however much I was doing, it wasn't quite pointed at the right thing yet. I didn't know what that right thing was. That was the problem. If I'd known, I'd have gone towards it. Instead, I just had this low-level awareness that something significant was missing and no clear idea on what to do about it. That's the state I was in when Jason walked over to me at the bar in France. I want to be clear about something before I go further. I didn't make the Mexico decision because of a single conversation with a stranger. I made it because the restlessness had been building for long enough that when someone offered an exit from everything familiar, something in me responded to it immediately and completely. The conversation was the catalyst. The decision had been forming underneath everything for a long time before that night. But Jason was significant, more significant than just that moment in the bar, which I'll come back to in a bit. Here's the insight I want to offer before we get to Mexico itself, because I think it's the most transferable thing in this video. Comfort is not neutral. It has a cost, and the cost is the gradual narrowing of what feels possible. The longer you stay in the known and the familiar, the more the unknown comes to feel not just uncomfortable, but genuinely dangerous. The gap between where you are and where the uncertain thing is gets wider, not because the uncertain thing is moved, but because your tolerance for crossing the gap has reduced. Every day you don't make the uncertain choice becomes a little more impossible to feel. What I was experiencing in Bournemouth as restlessness was that cost becoming visible. I'd built something real and functioning and respected. And it wasn't enough. Not because it wasn't good, because it wasn't pointed at anything large enough to justify what I was capable of. And I stayed in it long enough that I'd started to mistake the comfort of it for the rightness of it. Those are different things. Comfortable and right are not synonyms. And one of the most important skills a founder can develop is the ability to tell them apart. If you're running a hospitality business right now, you already know this distinction. You made your own version of the Mexico decision when you opened your doors. You chose the uncertain thing over the stable and the known. You made the choice that most people around you thought was too risky, too vague, too dependent on things going right that couldn't be guaranteed, and you made it anyway. This video is for the person who made that choice and who might need reminding of what they learned from living inside of it. I want to go back to Jason properly because the bar in France was only the beginning of his role in my story. When I landed in Mexico with a backpack and no plan, Jason was at the airport. He picked me up, he gave me his couch for the first 2 weeks while I found my feet, he helped me find an apartment, he helped me find work on a sustainable farm when I needed something to do and something to earn, and he encouraged me to complete my dive master qualification so I could work as a dive master, which I did for about 6 months. None of that was in the original conversation at the bar. He just showed up and kept showing up. Not dramatically, but practically, with the specific generosity of someone who understood what it meant to arrive somewhere unknown and needed someone to make the landing softer. But his significance went beyond the practical. Jason was, for a significant period of my time in Mexico, the embodiment of the thing that I was trying to find. He lived in a way that was grounded and purposeful and entirely his own. He took risks that were oriented towards what he actually wanted rather than what looked sensible from the outside. He had the quality of someone who had made his own version of the uncertain choice many times and had learned to trust what came from it. You don't always know when you meet someone that they're going to matter. Sometimes you only understand their significance when you're looking back at it from a much later vantage point, and you can see the thread that runs from them through everything that followed. Jason is one of those people for me. The conversation at the bar started everything. Everything he did afterwards shaped who I was while I was there, and who I was while I was there shaped everything that came after. I think about that sometimes, the way a single decision to say yes to something uncertain can bring people into your life who then become part of the architecture of who you are. You can't plan for that. You can only make the choice and then see what arrives. Before I go any further, I want to mention the Lead Well community. It's a free space built for hospitality founders who are carrying more than most people around them realize. If any of what I'm describing is resonating, the link's in the description. It's completely free, so come and find us. Let's get back to the video. Here's where I want to puncture the romanticism of this story, because I think there's a version of this kind of decision that gets told in a way that's too clean. The leap of faith, the brave choice, the moment everything changed. The reality is messier and more honest than that. Mexico didn't solve anything for me. That's the truest thing that I can say about it. Wherever you go, there you shall be. The relentlessness didn't evaporate when I got on that plane. It just meant I went through it on my own, in a country where I didn't know the landscape or the language well enough without the distraction of familiarity to hide in. There were stretches of genuine loneliness, not the romantic solitude of someone finding themselves, the real kind, the kind where you sit in a room and you feel very far from everything and everyone that has ever made you feel like you belong somewhere. The kind where the boldness of the decision you made starts to look from the inside like it might have been something else. I retreated into myself. And that's the honest version. The external noise was gone and what was left was internal, and some of it wasn't easy to be alone with. But alongside that, something else happened. A reconnection with life that had been missing. The dive mastering, the ranches, the jungle work and the farming, the hostel on Lake Atitlan in Guatemala, one of the most beautiful places that I've ever been. The people there who became the most significant in my life. A quality of presence and engagement with the world that I hadn't been able to access from inside the comfort of everything that I'd known. What uncertainty does when you stay long enough inside of it is strip away the things that aren't actually you. The roles, the reputation, the external markers of how you're doing. Without all of that, what's left is the person underneath. And being honest about who that person is and what they actually want, what they're actually capable of, is work that the uncertain choice forces you to do. It's uncomfortable work. That's the part nobody puts in the motivational speech, but it's the work that makes everything that comes after possible. 3 things came out of the Mexico period that I couldn't have learned in any other way. I want to name them specifically because I think they apply to anyone who has made or is thinking about making an uncertain choice. The first is that your identity is more portable than you think. Everything I'd built in Bournemouth, the authority, the reputation, the multiple simultaneous projects, the sense of being someone within a particular world, none of it came with me. I arrived in Mexico as just a person. No context, no credibility, no shorthand for who I was or why it mattered, and what remained once all of that was stripped away was actually enough, was actually the real thing. The person who existed without any of the structures was someone that you could build from. That discovery, as uncomfortable as it was to arrive at, was worth more than any of the structures that I'd left behind. The second is that the quality of the decision can't be judged from the middle of it. The Mexico decision felt right in the bar in France, but it felt like a mistake on several mornings in the months that followed. It feels, looking back from here, like one of the most important things that I've ever done. The middle of a decision, when you're living inside of the uncertainty and can't see where it's going, is the worst possible vantage point for assessing whether the decision was right. You have to stay long enough to find out, and most people don't. Most people feel the discomfort of the middle and they interpret it as evidence that the decision was wrong. It's almost never evidence of that. It's evidence of what it feels like to be inside something that matters. And the third is that the thing that you're looking for is almost never the thing that you find. I went to Mexico looking for something that I couldn't name. I didn't find that. I found Jason, and I found the dive mastering, found Guatemala, and a quality of presence that I'd lost in Bournemouth. And a friend who came out towards the end of the time there would eventually become my wife. I found a conversation with my best friend Mike over food at a local place where he looked around and he said, "There's nothing like this in Bournemouth." And that thought, which he said casually and moved on from, sat in me for months and eventually became a restaurant sketch on an iPad in a hostel. None of that was the plan. All of it was on the other side of the uncertain choice, and none of it would have existed if I'd stayed comfortable in Bournemouth. So I came home with nothing, no possessions beyond my comic books and the guitar that my parents had, no money, no job, no plan beyond an idea sketched on an iPad, and the level of conviction about it that I couldn't fully justify it rationally. But something had resolved, not the restlessness exactly, more like the restlessness had found its object. There was now something specific enough and significant enough that the energy that had been circling without direction had somewhere to go. The restaurant concept, the belief that I could build something in an industry I'd never worked in, the complete unfounded but entirely real certainty that it was going to work. That certainty is worth examining because it wasn't rational. It came from somewhere else, from the 18 months of being stripped back to the person underneath the roles and finding out that that person was capable of more than the comfortable version had ever been able to demonstrate. From Jason and everyone else who has shown me what it looked like to live in a way that was genuinely your own. From the quality of presence that had come back when there was finally enough space for it. The version of me that came back from Mexico was not fundamentally different from the one that had left Bournemouth, but something had been clarified, something that the comfort of the known had been obscuring. And once it was clarified, everything that followed became possible. Both my business partner JJ and Siobhan, my wife, had independently found the same venue while I was still traveling. That felt like something. I took work in a call center for 2 years so I wouldn't be distracted from building Ojo Rojo. And there were moments in those 2 years where I nearly quit entirely. Every time it was Siobhan who brought me back. Focus on the big picture, she'd say. Remind yourself who you are. And then on lunch night, JJ handed me a drink while looking around the room and he said, "That's yours." And it was, all of it. Built from a conversation at a bar in France and a one-way ticket and 18 months of living inside the uncertain choice long enough to find out what was on the other side. I want to end with the thing that makes the video relevant to you because I don't want this to just be a travel story. If you're running a hospitality business, you've already made the Mexico decision. Maybe not in those terms, maybe it was signing a lease that you weren't sure you could afford, handing in your notice before you had funding secured, telling people what you were building before it even existed. Choosing the uncertain thing over the path that was already laid out and available. That choice, whatever form it took for you, required exactly what mine did. The willingness to live inside the uncertainty long enough to find out what was on the other side. And if you're still in that business, still building, still showing up every day for something that you created from nothing, then you're still making that choice. Every time you don't quit, every time you adapt instead of fold, every time you choose to keep going when the middle of the decision feels like evidence that the decision was wrong. The question worth sitting with, and I want to offer it as a question rather than a challenge, is this. Where in your life right now are you choosing comfort over the uncertain thing that might actually be worth choosing? Not to create urgency of action, just to see it clearly, because the restlessness when it was present is almost always pointing at something. And the discomfort of the uncertain choice is almost never as dangerous as the slow cost of staying comfortable long past the point where the comfortable thing is still serving you. Jason said, "Come to Mexico." I said yes. I don't know what your version of that conversation looks like, but I know the quality of the choice it requires, and I know it's worth making. We started with a bar in France and a man I'd just met. What came from that conversation was Mexico, Jason, 18 months of living inside an uncomfortable choice, a restaurant designed on an iPad, a return home with nothing, and eventually everything. The stranger at the bar turned out not to be a stranger. He was the beginning of a chapter I couldn't have written from inside the comfort of what I already knew. That's what the uncertain choice gives you. Not a guarantee, not a plan, the people and the experiences and the self-knowledge that can only be found on the other side of the gap. And you can only get there by crossing it. The Lead Well community is free, remember, and the link's in the description. If you're in the middle of your own uncertain choice right now, come and find us. If you enjoyed this video, feel free to give it a like and a subscribe. It helps me, it helps the channel, and it helps people like us find the content that really matters. And as always, I'd love to remind you that you matter too. Don't forget that.